Thank you, Lauren. So I was having a great conversation with myself, everybody. So those polls were actually moderated with a voice, but I was beautifully on mute because I thought we were online earlier. So I apologize. Thankfully, I have a colleague across the hall that yelled, saying nobody can hear you. So I'm Nicole Melander. I'm, believe it or not, the Chief Technology Officer, even though clearly I'm technology challenged here at this afternoon. I joined Achieving the Dream August of the year that Achieving the Dream opened its doors, which was 2011. So I've been with the organization a little over 2 years. Prior to joining, I was on the faculty at American University for 4 years, teaching in the Kogod School of Business. And previous to that, I was with Oracle Corporation and Microsoft, so definitely a techie at heart, and I'm thrilled to be doing the work that I'm doing and applying that technology here at Achieving the Dream. Sitting with me is Linda Villanueva. Linda, as you can see from the slide, is not only an executive at one of our colleges, Brazosport College, but she's also a longtime data coach working with Achieving the Dream. And Linda's not feeling real great today, so hopefully she's going to be able to hang with us here, but I'll let her start with an introduction of herself.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm not feeling great, but nothing could stop me from being a part of this presentation with the folks at EWA. So I'm so pleased to be here as a representative of Achieving the Dream as a data coach, but also as a representative of an Achieving the Dream Leader College Institute, Brazosport College, that is engaged in the Achieving the Dream process to dramatically improve student success at our own institution. I currently serve, as Nicole said, as the Vice President of Academic and Student Affairs at Brazosport College, which is an Achieving the Dream Leader College, but also as a data coach to colleges that are located in Michigan, Washington, and Georgia. This is now the second time that I've had the privilege of speaking before members of EWA, and the last time I spoke about Achieving the Dream as well. But you'll notice that the focus of our presentation today is a bit different, but if any of you were present when I spoke in Austin, you may notice a little bit of an overlap.
Terrific. Thanks, Linda, and I appreciate that Linda flew up from Texas to join us, both for this event today and actually for our Intervention Showcase launch, which is happening tomorrow afternoon, and you'll all be getting a preview of that during the presentation today. So the agenda for this afternoon, so we have 2 hours with you, a little bit less than that now that I had the little gap in timing. We're going to start with just a brief background of Achieving the Dream, with the assumption that some of you aren't that familiar with us, and I promise we'll keep that brief. Then we'll move into building a culture of evidence, which is one of the core pillars of the work that we do in Achieving the Dream. And I will take you through into what happens in the work that a college who's participating in Achieving the Dream in their first 3 years with Achieving the Dream, and use, of course, an example from Brazosport, since Linda can speak very directly to the work that she's done as the person who is leading the Achieving the Dream effort at Brazosport. Then, as I said, we'll give you a sneak peek into the Intervention Showcase and finish up with some tips for using data and using the examples that we've described today when you're telling a story as a reporter. So we look forward to moving through this material and having a nice dialogue with you. Like I said, if you have questions or comments, please do type them up, and we'll be monitoring them as we go. So the first part, who we are as Achieving the Dream. So I won't read to you this title slide of who we are, but I will tell you that we are a fairly newly formed nonprofit. We're now, like I said, about 2.5 years old, but Achieving the Dream as an initiative, which is what it formerly was founded in 2004. So we're actually coming up on our 10-year anniversary. We have over 200 colleges in our network today. When we started in 2004, we had, I believe, 24 colleges, and we have continued to work with those colleges along with adding additional colleges to the network. So we're very much focused on the reform efforts needed for colleges to help students who typically struggle with success in college, particularly those low-income students and students of color. We have advisors that work with us, so a big part of our network is people like Linda, who are coaches for us. So a key part of the way that Achieving the Dream works is that we work directly with the colleges. We work directly with practitioners. And we have over 100 people who are coaches for us. They are either data coaches like Linda, who typically work with the institutional research offices, and we have leadership coaches who work with the college presidents and other executives. And one of the key pieces of our model or our work is that these two coaches always work hand in hand. They go to all the meetings together, they visit with all the same people to really try to impact change and to talk about the difficulties the college might be having in doing their work. We of course also work at the state level with state policy. We work a little bit at the federal level with federal policy, and we do that across currently 34 states in the District of Columbia. To get a better sense of the network itself, I just wanted to show a couple of charts since we're talking about data. This is data about our network. So you can see the types of colleges that participate in Achieving the Dream. So this is looking at those 200 colleges. And each of these stacked charts lets us see the distribution across different Pell categories. And we'll be talking about some of the the IPEDS categories a little bit later on today too. So as you know, IPEDS looks at each institution and categorizes it. And these are the categories. So one of them is around urbanization, whether it's a rural or suburban or town or city. Institution size, which you can see for us is very well distributed in terms of institution size. And then Pell recipients, which we use as a proxy for low-income students to look at, again, our network and the types of students that attend the colleges that are part of our network. The other way to look at the data is, again, around the student demographics. So we look at the number of students who are Black African American students, Hispanic Latino students, and their enrollment status being full-time, part-time. This is one of the key differences between the work that we do in collecting data for Achieving the Dream and the work that happens at the federal government level with IPEDS, and that many of our students, as you can see from this chart, are part-time students, and part-time students aren't represented in data that is often collected for education statistics. So the enrollment status is really a key part here to recognize that only 35% of the students at the aggregate attending our 200 colleges are actually full-time students. The rest are part-time students taking, anywhere from a single course to several courses in a semester. And so, of course, their completion time is much longer than it would be for a traditional full-time student. So the work that we do the colleges participate in a series of events that take place during site visits that our coaches make, and we're focused very much on helping them change the culture. In Achieving the Dream, the work that we're doing is very much about institutional change and trying to change the policies that impact the work, along with everything through to the faculty that are working with the students. And Linda will take you through many more details about how this process works and the data that supports that process. But the key piece here is that the colleges who are participating are using data throughout the process to make their decisions, and that's really one of the keystones of Achieving the Dream. And the sort of data that they use is collected in our Achieving the Dream database, which I will take you through in just a moment. So the sort of work that we do is around continuous improvement, right, documenting results and sharing those results, and that's much of what we're going to talk about with the intervention showcase this afternoon, looking at student data and the value of that student data in making decisions. And then, ultimately getting to the big statement of the fact that the data informs the decision making. I went to a kickoff for one of our grants, and we asked 14 colleges what they had really benefited, what they had gained from being part of Achieving the Dream, and all of them talked about using data, evidence-based decision making, etc. So it really is a very big part of the work that we do. And then just one last piece before I turn it over to Linda is around the database itself. So we do collect data from the colleges on an annual basis. We have since 2004. So we have a student unit record database that consists of 3 million students who, again, attend those colleges who are part of our network. So every fall they submit to us the new students who are joining that college and starting to take classes. And then they also submit to us term information. So as the students complete their semester, if they're on semesters, or they complete their terms if they're on, term schedule, they they submit that data to us. We have almost 13 million term records that make up our database. And you'll see that we actually have 231 reporting units, which is more than the number of colleges we have, because we have some colleges like Ivy Tech, for example, that have a number of campuses, and those colleges choose to submit data to us for each of those campuses so that they can not only look at the data from Ivy Tech as a whole, but from the individual campuses that make up Ivy Tech. So that's just a really thumbnail sketch of the Achieving the Dream database. As I turn it over to Linda to start taking us through building a culture of evidence and inquiry.
Sure. So as Nicole has just discussed, a big part of what Achieving the Dream does is to support participating colleges in using data to inform strategic decision-making to support students. So when colleges agree to participate in Achieving the Dream, they're committing to ATD's student-centered model of institutional improvement. This model is based upon 5 key principles designed to frame the work of helping more students to stay in school and to earn degrees. While every college has its own way of approaching the work of Achieving the Dream, the 5 principles of ATD provide the foundation for keeping colleges focused on improving student success over time. Throughout the process, my role as a coach is to offer customized support to help each college's team implement data-informed programs and policies that build long-term institution-wide commitment to success. Because I'll be speaking more about how we support colleges in creating a culture of evidence, however, let me briefly just mention that in addition to creating a culture of evidence, the other 4 principles are committed leadership, broad engagement, systemic institutional improvement, and equity. But let's move on to the development of a culture of evidence, the theme of our webinar. In other words, how do we use data to drive decisions about how we support student success? So in order to understand how we create a culture of evidence to improve student success, we really need to start by defining what student success actually is. At its core, Achieving the Dream is about helping all community college students reach their goals, but from a measurement perspective, ATD defines student success as 5 measures which are intermediate milestones or indicators of student success. These indicators include the rates at which students successfully complete developmental instruction and advance to credit-bearing courses or college-level courses, enroll in and successfully complete the initial college-level or gatekeeper courses in subjects such as math and English, the rate at which they complete the courses they take with a grade of C or better, persistence from one term to the next, and that's simply if a student shows up and enrolls in one semester, do they return and enroll the next semester? And then finally, the rate at which they attain certificates or degrees. Now, from a research standpoint, we know that these are all important milestones that, once reached, increase students' chances of ultimately earning credentials. But from a practical perspective, it's not hard to see why these outcomes are so critical. So for example, let's take a look at some statistics that illustrate the importance of these milestones. And actually, I think we're going to ask you to guess one of these as well. So starting off, since I'm a Texas girl here, we know that 2/3 of students who are referred to developmental courses don't complete, according to the Texas Association of Community Colleges. We also know that at the national level, Achieving the Dream tells us that 25% of students referred to developmental education courses even attempt a Gateway College credit course within their first year. So that's a lot of students who are then not moving on to college-level classes. So now we're going to do a poll for the next one. So the next one says, what percentage of students who enter with the goal of earning a degree or certificate have met that goal 6 years later? What's your guess?
So 29% have voted, 36, 52. Keep them coming. Let's see if we can get a full quorum, 71%. A few more stragglers. A little bit more. All right, terrific. I will go ahead and close that poll. We're almost at 90%. And I'll share the results.
So almost a quarter of you got the answer right, and that is 46%. So fewer than 46% of students who enter a community college with the goal of earning a degree or certificate have actually met that goal 6 years later, which means, as you well know then, by matter of subtraction, that more than 50% of our students are not reaching their goals. By the way, as we go through this presentation, don't hesitate to stop us if you have any questions whatsoever. We'd be happy to answer them. The other thing is that only about half of those students who do enroll in any one semester are likely to enroll again a year later. So once again, half of our students who intend to complete a degree do not return a year later. And finally, again, back home at Texas, developmental math students in the Lone Star State are 32% less likely to transfer or to complete a certificate, license, or degree than students who met college readiness standards, according to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. So let's take a look at how colleges develop a culture of evidence by looking at 3 years in the life of an Achieving the Dream college. Year one is typically referred to as a planning year. Now, at a broad level, the planning year is the time when an Achieving the Dream college publicly commits to the Achieving the Dream process of improving student outcomes, then broadly engages the college community in understanding the urgency with which it needs to change its processes to better support student success. Then comes the very arduous process of using data to prioritize actions. Now, for any of you who have ever talked to someone from an ATD college who has gone through the process of collecting and examining data for ATD, you'll know that it's not for the faint of heart. It requires a lot of time and resources, oftentimes resources that many colleges struggle to have. So a lot of time is spent with institutional research offices and offices of information technology going back several years to drill down on data and to answer a slew of questions that we typically don't always look at. And overall, though, the process is marked by a journey of trying to answer a few critical questions. The first is to answer what is currently wrong. A hallmark feature of this process is to collect data on groups of students who share common characteristics and to track them over time. In this process, we're collecting at a minimum data on the 5 outcome measures of Achieving the Dream, and we're disaggregating this data across key subgroups such as race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. For example, we often will go back several years and take a look at all students who started in a given semester who shared the characteristic of being first-time in college degree-seeking students. We'll look at not only how many of them started in developmental education classes, but also whether or not they stayed enrolled over subsequent semesters, whether they were able to enroll in college-level classes, and if so, whether they were successful in completing those classes and attaining a credential. So this process of collecting all of this disaggregated longitudinal cohort data allows us to answer 2 very critical questions. The first is, which student groups are less successful than others? That is to say, what are the achievement gaps that we find? And the second is, at what time periods are we losing students? That is to say, what are our leakage points? Taking a look at the qualitative data that we've already collected often reveals that a college is a lot like other colleges who have less than desirable rates of progression, persistence, and graduation. So while not a pleasant finding, it helps to reinforce that we're a part of a larger national community that's not in the same boat. So this second slide here is answering what's wrong. So once we know what's wrong, we have to ask ourselves why. This is where we're actually really trying to understand what's happening at the institution itself that is leading to achievement gaps and to those leakage points. Here we're asking ourselves, what are the underlying factors that contribute to where we are, and what barriers and challenges have students faced in their journeys to graduation? And the data to answer this question typically comes from 4 different sources: literature reviews, local surveys, the assessment of learning outcomes from individual classes and programs, and also from focus groups. And as a data coach, we're encouraging our colleges to speak directly to students, to faculty, and also to external groups to understand why they see, or what they see as the major challenges and barriers facing students. Some colleges are often tempted to skip this step and to go right into the next one, but doing so can lead to false assumptions and for some the perception that they don't have voice into the process. So it's very critical that this step is not overlooked. So now it's time to actually use the data. And at this point, we're broadly engaging faculty and staff. We want to make it very clear that we're not in a process whereby high-level, senior-level administrators or executives are taking data that they have found and simply making decisions on behalf of faculty and students. Rather, they're really sharing what they found across the college community, what students have told us, and asking employees and partners to either revise existing strategies or to design new interventions. We're also taking a hard look at policies at this point in time and creating those that support students or getting rid of or modifying those that hinder student completion.
So Linda, could you give an example of a policy change that you've seen at several Achieving the Dream colleges?
Sure. So a good one, and unfortunately this is an example that has happened at my own institution, is when we talked with students who, and we were comparing the success rate of students who receive financial aid compared to those who don't receive financial aid, and looking at those success rates, we noticed that there was a significant gap. And that is that some students, those students who were receiving financial aid, were doing less successfully in their classes and completing credentials at a lower rate than students who did not receive financial aid. And when we talked with students who were receiving financial aid and dug more into the process, one of the things that we found, and this is at other institutions too, is that they had lots of problems receiving that financial aid. And because they had problems receiving that financial aid, from a policy standpoint, we knew that there were processes that needed to be changed. One of those at my own institution was that we needed to change our payment plan arrangements. We found out that we were cutting off arrangements to make plans for students a week before classes started. So these were students that wanted to take classes, yet we cut off our payment plan arrangements a week before, and they were worried about how they were going to get into classes, and by the way, we were losing enrollments as a result. So that was one thing that was easy enough to fix. We simply changed the date and communicated broadly that we were doing that, and we got a lot of positive feedback.
Great. Thanks.
Sure. So now we've reached year 2. In year 2, we're communicating our plans to improve student outcomes. We're encouraging employees to take leadership roles in implementing our new strategies, and we're using data to see whether our strategies have even been successful. And on the basis of this data, we're refining our strategies to ensure that they are as effective as possible. In this process, we're using some tools that you see here and that are provided for us at the end of the presentation, should you like to see a larger model, that are called logic models and evaluation plans to answer 2 very critical questions. The first is, to what extent did the interventions address factors impeding success? And the second is, to what extent did the interventions increase student success? Now again, as a data coach, I can tell you that a lot of colleges will not want to go through the process of creating a logic model or writing down and putting together an evaluation plan, but this really is the roadmap for telling an institution or groups within the institution how they implement a strategy and what the expected outcomes are. And it also helps to answer whether or not we are collecting the appropriate data to determine whether or not our interventions are successful. So finally, we've come to year 3 and beyond, because a lot of community colleges choose to stay in Achieving the Dream beyond 3 years, like my own, that has stayed in since 2006. This is an ongoing process in which we're continuously building upon what we've done in our work. So in year 3, we're encouraging our colleges to scale all of those interventions that have been proven to be successful so that they reach as many students as possible. Because if we know that they're successful, we want to make sure that everyone has the benefit of receiving those services. And we continue to use data to evaluate and refine our strategies while focusing on leveraging all of the different processes that are going on at the college, such as accreditation or professional development, and other grant initiatives, so that we're engaged in a continuous cycle of improvement.
Linda was going to make one comment about the scaling, Achieving the Dream using data to inform its own policies and the work that we do. One of the things that we learned in this process is that some of our colleges were thinking about scaling a little bit too late. right, and potentially putting pilots in place for interventions that really could never be scaled because of cost or other resource factors. As a data coach, have you seen that sort of challenge, and have you helped colleges think about scaling kind of early in the game instead of later on in the process?
Yeah, I have seen that happen. And, you know, as a data coach, one of the things that we always do is we encourage them to have courageous conversations from the very beginning. And we also encourage them, though, when planning interventions, to plan with scale in mind from the very beginning. So we ask them probing questions such as, okay, you know, what are our goals for success? Do we plan to improve developmental education rates in math by 10%, and by when? And if it's successful, who are we then going to scale to? So we have those plans in place, or we should have those plans in place. And yes, you definitely do hear those who say, you know, the resources are scarce. You know, I could be, you know, kind of a pessimist or a little bit trite when I say we always have the money to do what we need to do. And I simply only need to look at a college's budget to determine what their priorities truly really are. So, you know, this is an outcropping of committed leadership, and if the senior leaders, the president, and the board are committed to student success, then they will be correspondingly committed to providing those resources that they know will move the needle to keep students moving along that pipeline to attaining their degrees.
Right. Terrific. Thank you. Any questions from the audience before we move into the next piece? And again, feel free to use the question box that should be right on your toolbar, that should be on the side of your screen. If it has kind of gone away, there might be a little arrow that you can click on to expand it so that you can see that box again. So Karen asks about having access to recording. So yes, Karen, you will have access to recording afterwards. We will make the recording available, and we will make the PowerPoint available. Oh, right, and we're also, we will share the, we're launching tomorrow the intervention showcase, and we will share that with you tomorrow. Any other questions before we continue on? Don't be shy. All right, terrific. So I guess we're answering everything. So go ahead, Linda. Take us into the story of Brazosport.
Well, I was just thinking that earlier on you were asking them about how comfortable they were with data, and about 3/4 of them said that they were very comfortable or comfortable. So maybe they want us to give them some math problems. We can bust out some college algebra questions and see how well our audience does. I would
see
not
if they
want
would test into developmental education, right? Yep.
That's a test I'm not taking. So let's move on and talk about how we've applied this process at my own college. It seems like Achieving the Dream has always really been a part of Brazosport College. We've been in Achieving the Dream College since 2006, and in 2010 we were honored to be recognized as a leader college in the student completion movement. So we, like other colleges, had to start by having courageous conversations and digging through all of our student information databases, collecting a whole lot of data, disaggregating it across a number of different groups. And some of the things that we found were very shocking. For example, we found that of all of those students between the fall and spring semesters, of 100% who began in the fall semester, 35% of them were not returning in the spring. And so, of course, we have to ask ourselves, you know, where have those 35% gone, and why did they not return to us? We also found, looking at the same type of retention data from fall to fall, that, again, of 100% of those students who started in any given fall semester, only 50% of them returned. So similar to the data that I showed earlier, we mirrored exactly what was going on at the state and national level. So the next slide, I'd like to ask you guys what you think here. Let me set the stage by first asking you, or telling you what you're seeing here. So those three little building blocks there are 3 levels of developmental math that lead up to a course called college algebra that is required all around the country for most students to graduate with a 2-year degree in a community college. And so that course is very, very important and very significant to most students to earning a college degree, because if they don't finish it, they're not getting a degree. So the question that I want to ask you is, of all of those students who start at the very lowest level of developmental math, and for us that's called pre-algebra or math 0404, what percentage of those do you think finish that college level algebra class? And let's give them 5 years to finish, and they finish it with a C or better, because they just need to make at least a C. So let's open up the polls and see what people think.
So why don't you repeat the question?
Sure. So what percent of those students who started off at the lowest level of developmental math successfully completed that college algebra class within 5 years with a C or better?
We have 48%, 50%, 60%. Keep them coming. A few more people to still get a response from, 69%. Let's have a few more responses, and then we'll show you the results. 76%. Let's get a couple that are left, a few stragglers. All right, great. I'll go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
So we have some optimists in the group that are believing that and hoping. I would love to have 25%, or is it 20? Yeah, 25% finish that college algebra class. If we had that, we would be very, very happy at this point. But to be true, the answer is actually only 5%. So, of course, I hope you guys are affected by this as much as I am, and as much as I was when in 2006 I saw this data and had to ask myself, as well as others at the college, are we okay with having 95% of students who start off at that lowest level of developmental math not get a degree, not earn a degree? Are we okay with 95% of those students not being successful? It's really, really difficult to stomach that kind of data.
Yeah, talk about a courageous conversation, right?
Well, especially with the math department.
Yeah.
That's not one that they typically want to have. But it's not about blaming. It's about finding the right services that are needed to help all boats rise.
Yeah, terrific.
So, as I discussed earlier, once we know what is going on, and I'm just giving you a little bit of a snippet here at Brazosport College, we had to then answer that why question. So we dig deeper with qualitative data, and that data essentially told us a few things. Our students were telling us that they had jobs, that they were working full-time and trying to go to school, some of them full-time, that they were parents, they were taking care of other people, so that they had life issues and personal issues going on. Some of them had few financial resources, and then some of them were finding that they really wanted to do well in college, but they just lacked the skills to learn how to succeed in a college level class. So they wanted basic skills, they told us, in, for example, how to take notes in a classroom, in a college level classroom, because they hadn't been exposed to a lecture type class, or how would they take notes in a discussion group. And they also wanted to know things like, if I'm having problems at the college, where do I go to get help? Or let's say that I'm preparing for an essay exam, how do I prepare for that versus a multiple choice exam? What are the differences? So they were really struggling to be college students in those roles. But they also identified that there were some significant institutional issues that were getting in their way. And it wasn't too great to hear that they were having problems with financial aid, that they didn't like the application process that we presented, that they didn't want to have to talk to 12 different people before they could receive the right answer, that instead they'd like to know what that answer is right up front and not have to come back into the college. So it was a bit disheartening, but it was important for us to know. And so all of that led us to deciding that we needed to create what is now our Learning Frameworks course, and that's a student success course. And we did this for a couple of reasons. The first was, according to ATD data, just like us, there are large numbers of entering students who require developmental education, and that rate of success in those classes is really low. But one of the things that we knew in the network was that there were several institutions who had adopted a student success course, And we weren't alone in doing this, and we wanted to learn from them, and they had, using that student success course, moved the needle in several key areas. So we wanted to look at something that was very similar, and it was just one of those areas that we really needed to grow on at our own college. So very quickly about student success courses in this particular one. So Learning Frameworks is a student success course that provides on-the-job training to provide students with the attitudes, the skills, and the behaviors that they need to be successful. So in terms of attitudes, this course is helping our students to take responsibility for their own learning, to find relevance and meaning in their studies, and to cope with stressors when they experience them. We're training them in a number of important skills such as time management, how to read at the college level, how to write at the college level as well, how to take notes, how to research for college level classes, preparing for exams, improving their memory, and problem solving, just to name a few. And then finally, if they're successful in all of this, in terms of behaviors, we're teaching them to seek help when they're struggling, to set goals and to persist at those goals. And if we've done everything that we could do, they're going to take the skills that they've learned in that particular class and they're going to transfer them to their other college coursework. And so that's what we have found. So through the generosity of Achieving the Dream, we started with very humble beginnings in the spring of 2007 with only 2 sections, less than 60 students. And by the spring of 2013, though, we had grown to 27 sections. And that was because of our committed leadership, who looked at our data and said, this is not only an important class, but it's one that is moving the needle on student success. And so because of that, they made the requirement of this class for all of our first-time in college students. And to date now, we've had almost 7,000 students who have completed that class. And as a small institution, that's a sizable number of students. So some of you guys might be asking, has this class actually been successful? And the answer to that is it has in a lot of areas. So if you look here, not to inundate you with data, but what we have found is that this course has been successful in moving the needle for 2 out of those 3 levels of developmental math, but also in moving the needle for students in developmental English classes and in developmental or college level math classes. And I know it's hard to see, but that's the big picture overview of that. So the next slide also illustrates the same thing, that again, that we have seen increases compared to the students who had not taken the class on the very left in 2006, comparing them to the students across the years who have taken the class, that they've been more successful in that college level algebra class, which is a significant course for the students to complete, and more successful in our English composition and rhetoric class. Similarly, what we also wanted to find was that students would be less likely to withdraw in those same types of classes, and that's exactly what we have found, is the withdrawal rate in those classes over time has gone down significantly. And then finally, we wanted to look at retention. And at one point, we had exceeded, our retention rate from fall to spring had exceeded, compared to a baseline of only 66%, over 90%, that's a huge number to increase by and to have students return. But over the years, what we have found is we've settled in at an average of about 80% retention rate, which still far exceeds the retention rate that you see there on the left at 66%. And then again also, the fall retention rate has increased significantly, again, where we were only seeing 50% of our students who were remaining enrolled a year later. We now have over 60% of those students coming back to enroll at Brazosport College a year later.
So a question for you, Linda, before you move away from the student success course. One of the attendees, Linda, asked a question about those remedial courses. So that 3 remedial course sequence that you have in place, and she's saying, you know, that's a lot of money to pay for those 3 courses in sequence, particularly if you don't make it through to that final algebra gatekeeper course. So would it be smarter to combine some of the courses? And I know at many of the states and many colleges are looking at changes to their developmental education sequence. Wondering if you could talk to either what you've seen at Brazosport and things you've entertained in addition to your student success course, or things that you've seen as a data coach at other colleges around developmental education.
So you're right on target, and no wonder you're a Linda V, just like myself. So I'm glad to see that. Yes, that is one of the things that you're seeing across the nation, is that we're realizing that this whole issue of college algebra being the ultimate criterion of, you know, determining whether or not a student is successful in classes, we're having to rethink that, and we're doing a couple of different things. One is that we are combining those classes, as you just said, into different ways of delivering that instruction. So we have, for example, and a lot of other colleges, we've modeled this after a lot of other successful ATD colleges who've done what we call modularization. And what that means is we've combined all of those classes into one, and the students work at their own pace. They have peer mentors in the classroom who they can work with. There's an instructor in there, and there are tutors in there who are there to help, but they're working at their own pace, and they're able to, if they are, you know, really conscientious and they're hardworking, they can make it through all 3 sections of developmental math, and many have at our college in 1 semester. So they can knock all of those out really quickly. The other thing that we're doing is not just with the developmental math classes, but we're starting from the very beginning, and we're trying to understand who our students are and who we're serving. So what we're finding is that there's a significant difference between a student who comes to us from, say, high school, who is developmental, versus a student who is coming to the community college from the workforce, having been out of high school for maybe over a decade, who just hasn't refreshed themselves in math. And so sometimes it is that there are skills that are really lacking, but other times they just need to brush up on those skills. So we have revamped our intake system so that everyone is aware, number one, of what those stakes are. And as you said, Linda, if you have to take all 3 of those classes, that's a significant financial burden, but also the chances of being successful are not very high. So we want our students to know before they take that college placement test that they need to take it seriously, and that there are resources available for them to practice. So that has helped to cut down our rate significantly. But you're having to redesign developmental education, because even if you can improve that number, you have to change the way you deliver the classes. You have to get into the classroom.
Yeah, terrific. You have a few more questions. So Joanne asks about the looking at the psych students, the Psych 1300, as opposed to all students. She's wondering whether you're skewing the data to the most capable students.
That's a good question. And so what we did, though, is the 66% is all students. So that is comparing to all students. But what the best thing that we had in the absence of never having implemented this initiative was to compare it to those students who had never taken it in the past at our college. And we knew that data would go up. We wanted it to go up. But we didn't expect it to go that high. The other data that we could look at was the rates of success for colleges who are also in Achieving the Dream, and we contacted a couple of them. And both based on our conversations with them and looking at the literature with regard to student success courses, the only place that these courses have typically really moved the needle in long-term studies has been with regard to retention. So they weren't seeing moving the needle, for example, in improving success in college-level algebra, in English, or in developmental math and English classes. The other thing that I haven't illustrated here, which was really important to us, is we had a sizable achievement gap between our Hispanic students and our Caucasian students, and that was really important to us as we're a Hispanic-serving institution, with approximately 30% of our enrollment made up by Hispanics. And what we found with this class is that students who took this class, that Latinos, not only we not only achieved the closing of that achievement gap, but we also saw that Latinos in some cases were actually outpacing Caucasians, and so that was a huge thing for us.
And then a final question from Kristen asking about transfer of that particular course, the psych course. Does it transfer more easily because it's labeled as a psych course?
It's actually crosswalked with psych and education, so it can fit in either slot. And it transfers as an elective, but this fall we have recently made the move to put it in what is called our core curriculum in Texas. And by virtue of statute, any Texas institution has to take the class because it's a part of our core. So it is absolutely transferable, and outside of Texas, again, it should be transferred in as an elective. But a lot of institutions, including Ivy League institutions, require students to take a course exactly like this. And so, they might be required to do something else extra, but we're finding that we're not having issues with students who are transferring that in.
Terrific. Thanks, Linda, Joanne, and Kristen for the questions.
So we have earned a lot of praise, and we're very pleased about this. But one of the most recent things that have happened to us is that last year we were recognized by the Aspen Institute, which is really the premier signature award for community college excellence, as being one of the top 10 community colleges in the nation. And we were the only college out of 50 to be offered this distinction in the state of Texas. So no other Texas community college was offered with this distinction. So we were very pleased with this. So where are we going now? Well, we, as I said earlier, encourage our colleges to do more, to scale when they know that the course or the intervention that they're using is successful. So that's exactly what we're doing at Brazosport College. So we are scaling the class to serve more students. But because we haven't been able to move the needle in some areas, we really want to also improve outcomes. So, for example, we weren't able to move the needle and have really struggled with helping students at that lowest level of developmental math. So one of the things that we have done is that we've partnered with the University of Texas Charles A. Dana Center and Uri Treisman to be a part of something called the New Mathways project, in which all 50 community colleges are committed to modifying and redeveloping the way they provide and deliver developmental education math classes. And it requires students who are in developmental math to take the Learning Frameworks course or something very similar to it that was based upon the model from Brazosport College. So we've enhanced the class to make sure that there are connections that relate to math, and in the hopes that we'll see the same type of success for those students who are at the very lowest level. But we realize that's a gap, but being able to scale that across the state of Texas is a big win for us. And most importantly, a big win for our students.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Linda. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit. Drum roll, please, for the official preview of the launch for the Intervention Showcase. So we're really excited to introduce this platform to the field, and we're thrilled that you joined us for this launch. So I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of demos that are related to what Linda has talked about in terms of what happens in the first year and what happens in the later years. So bear with me if there are any challenges here in terms of my navigating the mouse through this, but hopefully you'll be able to get a good understanding of our new Intervention Showcase. Before I do that, any further questions that are related to the discussion we just had with Linda? Oh, terrific. All right, so here we go. So we're going to talk first about that early year. So Linda talked about the planning year, where the college is looking at their data, asking the hard questions, having those courageous conversations, really understanding where they're having the most challenges. Now, as Achieving the Dream, as a network, of course, one of our main roles is to be the connector, to find ways to connect a college like Linda's with other colleges that are doing similar work. And so for a college during their planning year, much of what they're asking is, what are other colleges doing that are like me? So we're going to use the Intervention Showcase this afternoon to explore that a little bit. So we're going to pretend that we are a brand new college in the Achieving the Dream network. We have done some analysis, and we've started to understand where some of our challenge areas are, and we're interested in understanding what other colleges that are like me are doing to address similar sorts of challenges. So here we are at the Achieving the Dream Intervention Showcase. You'll see at the top of the screen that there are 3 tabs that speak to the type of intervention data that we're looking at. And I'm going to use the spotlight here to show you, so we can explore by academic discipline, we can explore by intervention type, and we can explore the actual details of the interventions themselves. And this will be challenging for me with the 2 screens I have going here. So for this particular discussion, we're going to actually focus on this dashboard. So this is the one looking at by intervention type. And don't worry, I'll go through each of these dashboards more than I have thus far. So these are all of the interventions that are in the interventions database put together by Achieving the Dream. These are reported to us on an annual basis. So colleges tell us what they've been working on, and then they tell us how things are going with what they've been working on. So and then we have different ways to categorize that information. So here you can see by intervention type whether they're focusing on DevEd, gateway courses, student success courses like what Linda was speaking about, faculty professional development, etc. The size of the different boxes represents how many interventions are behind that. And we'll speak to the whole database so you have an understanding of everything that's in it as we get a little bit further into this scenario. So again, we're a first-year college going through work with Achieving the Dream. And I want to see what other colleges like me are doing. So I'm going to use the filters on the side. And the first thing I'm going to filter on is degree of urbanization. Again, these are IPEDS categories for each institution that reports data to IPEDS. As many of you probably already know, they are categorized as being in one of these degrees of urbanization. So I've changed it so that I'm not looking at any degrees of urbanization. So you'll see the dashboard entirely went away because we've selected no data based on this filter. But we're going to go ahead and add filters back in. So I'm going to look at a small city, a large suburb, or a mid-sized suburb. So for the college that I'm representing, that's the best match for me. So I'm not interested in only how I'm categorized, but others that are close to the way that I'm categorized. So by picking those 3 degrees of urbanization, you can see that there are 178 interventions across 41 colleges. So from a browsing perspective, that's still a bit much. So I want to get more specific about what I look like. So here I'm going to look at enrollment. So again, I'm going to do the same thing of deselecting all of the enrollments and then going back and saying I'd like to look at enrollments between 10,000 and essentially 20,000. And again, it tells us how many interventions fall in that category. So I can use the spotlight to show you where I'm looking on the screen. We've got 66 interventions across 14 colleges. So as we apply these filters, it's instantly updating the data so that you can see what you have left to make sure you haven't sort of filtered too far. And then we're going to also look at student target population. So when interventions are put in place, they are typically focusing on a particular population of students, a target group. And for this example, the college is still doing data analysis. Again, we're in the first year, but they're pretty confident they're going to be looking at 2 groups. So first I'm going to deselect all of the student target populations and say I want to look at academically underprepared students who are first time. Right, so based on that, you can see that we are left with 41 interventions at 14 colleges. Right, so this is our browsing group, right, and we now can start to drill down even further. So I could look at a particular box on this chart, right? So you can see that I can highlight. So here I'm looking at first year experience. So I'm interested in programs and initiatives that have been put in place, interventions that have been put in place around first year experience. And here we see 8 colleges with 12 interventions. So if we look at the middle part of this box, you can see the interventions that fall in that category. And then we also provide the description of how Achieving the Dream defines what a first year experience is. And of course, these definitions are provided to the colleges, so when they are providing this data to us, they understand what we mean by first year experience. Sorry, I just have to get my cursor back in the right place here. Wrong way. Here it is. Sorry, I'm working on two screens. Now I can go to the final tab, right, which is College and Intervention Details, which is the tab at the top. So I've said I still want to look at those 41 interventions across 14 different colleges. So here I can just simply see a list of those colleges, right? So here we can see the first 5 on the screen here, Anne Arundel, Century College, etc. And from a browse perspective, I just want to look at some of these interventions and get a little bit more information about what these are. So when I highlight a particular intervention, in this case I'm looking at increasing equity for students of color, low income, and first generation students, which is being put in place or is already underway at Century College, we get a little bit more information. So the student populations that are targeted, because they can pick multiple target groups. The percent of students that are served, Achieving the Dream uses a sliding scale of the level of scaling. So we look at whether it's some, more, or most students who are being served. So in the some category, it's 25% or less. The more category, it's 25.1 to 60%, and the most is greater than 60%. So you can see in this case, they're at the more category in terms of how they have scaled this intervention. And then we get a little bit of information about the intervention itself, additional description. So for this scenario, I'm just going to continue to browse. I'm not going to look any further at that intervention. I'm going to look at another question. Right, so in this one, I'm looking at mentoring, which is being put in place by Delaware County Community College. And here we can see it's specific to first-time students. The percent of students that are served, again, is in this case, in the some level. So they're sort of just getting started with this particular intervention. And then a small description of that intervention. We'll look at one more, which is Northampton Community College. Here the target group is academically underprepared students. Again, it's in the earlier stages, so it isn't scaled yet beyond the 25%, and we get a small description of that intervention. Just making sure if there are questions. And my colleagues told me I was going a little fast, so I'll make sure to slow down as we continue on. So this particular intervention being put in place by Northampton Community College, I think is interesting and is one that I'd like Linda to elaborate on, in that before we had the intervention showcase, of course, our colleges were still networking with one another. In fact, when Linda was talking about the student success course that they put in place, she mentioned that she had called some other colleges to understand what their experiences had been. And that's really the purpose for us of the intervention showcase. It's all about making connections between colleges. It's our own little dating service that we're putting in place here. So for this example, for Northampton Community College, if you read the beginning of the text, it says that they've adopted the Accelerated Learning Program, which was put in place by another college, the Community College of Baltimore County. So even before we made this new platform available to them, they had started to connect with one another. And I thought, Linda, you could provide examples of work that you've done as a data coach in connecting colleges, and maybe some other things about how a college might use this in the planning year before we switch to what they might do in the later years of their involvement with Achieving the Dream.
Sure. So I can actually speak to this from the perspective of being someone who is at a college who went through this entire process of planning and then implementing strategies. But also from the perspective of being a data coach and assisting other colleges in doing the same thing. So starting with the first, though, which was being a member of an institution who was going through this process, when we looked at our data and we talked with our students and our faculty, and we discovered that we really wanted to implement a student success course, we went to our coach and we said, you know, who do you know that's implementing a student success course? And, you know, we had one coach, one leadership coach and one data coach, and they said, well, I'm also working with 2 other colleges, one of which is doing a student success course. And we found out that, oh, well, this is great, but the one college that they were talking about was nothing like our own. It was a really huge institution. The demographics of the institution were really different. They weren't a Hispanic serving institution. And so while we were grateful that they provided us with information, we needed to reach out to a deeper and much bigger and broader network. So we did some networking on our own and looked around in some of the literature that we could, you know, find, and we were able to come across a couple of other colleges. But I can tell you that having had this tool then, we would have been able to make the connection on our own. We wouldn't have had to reach out to any coaches for this part, and it would have made it a lot simpler. But the same thing goes from my perspective as a data coach. So I, work with a couple colleges in Washington, one in Georgia, and a couple in Michigan. And again, my perspective is then based upon, 5 or 6 colleges that I've worked with in the past, compared to the over 200 colleges that are part of the network. So I'm not a walking encyclopedia of all of the different colleges that are out there. So this tool now, though, when a college comes to me and says, hey, I'm interested in adopting accelerated learning programs, but I want to talk with, someone about, how they started it, and I want to talk with someone who comes from an institution who's just like my own. So they can go to this tool now and they can get that information in just a few minutes.
Terrific. Great. Thanks, Linda. And David, I see that you've asked you want to see what's behind the curtain here and the full details. And I'll get to that in a second demo, I promise. So let's do the second demo, and then we'll take some additional questions. So on the implementation, so now we're beyond the first year, so we call these implementation years, year 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Again, we've had colleges that joined in 2004 and are still implementing with us, so it appears the work is never done. So let's look at that scenario, and again, I promise to go a little bit slower. So we're back at the main dashboard. So again, we have the tabs at the top here, exploring by academic discipline, by intervention type, etc. So we can see the target of those interventions in terms of the subject areas. And again, the boxes defining the number of interventions that are sort of behind that particular description that we've provided there. And now, remember, the scenario here is a college who's been with Achieving the Dream for some time. We'll say that they're in their 3rd year, and they are implementing a particular intervention, and they're struggling. So some things are going well, but some things are not going as well as they might hope. So they're looking for other colleges that are ahead of them, that have already done this work and that they might be able to learn from. Again, recognizing, that every college is different, but trying to find some of these connections to have conversations so that our colleges can learn from one another. So if we start with that 463 interventions, if we look just at math, and this was the area that this particular college happened to be focusing on, we see that there are 91 colleges and 183 interventions. Still probably pretty overwhelming to think about calling 91 colleges. So again, we're going to take advantage of the filters to get to a smaller list for the college to make contact with. So in this case, instead of looking at institutional sort of general characteristics around degree of urbanization and enrollment, we want to look for colleges who have a similar student profile. So as Linda was describing what they were doing with the learning frameworks, they wanted to find an institution that served a similar student population. So we're going to look at what we use again as a proxy for low-income students, so Pell grantees. So again, we'll deselect all of those so the dashboard is empty. And then we're going to look at 20 to 40% Pell grantees. So we're looking for student demographics for that institution that are serving 20 to 40% of their students would be considered low-income students. You can also look at the filter around Hispanic Latino students. So again, the same thing. We will deselect a few of these. So in this case, we get rid of the 25% and we get rid of the 0%. So just deselecting those, which is changing what's in the dashboard. So for our institution, we have 12.6 to 25% Hispanic Latino students, so a little less than Linda's college. But that's the target group that we're interested in for these interventions. So here we're looking now at 31 interventions across 6 colleges, so starting to look much more reasonable in terms of reaching out. But let's just get a little bit more specific and see if we can narrow it down even a little bit further. So for the Black African American student population at this college, it's actually lower. Right, so we're going to select 0 to 20%. So we have more of a heavy Hispanic population than we do Black African American. So by selecting that additional filter, now we've narrowed it down to 19 interventions at 5 colleges. So it's starting to look pretty reasonable. Now again, remember that we were interested in math. So if we look specifically at that block, right, so if I just click on that one, I see that now we're talking about only 4 colleges who are putting in place 7 different interventions related to math. So this is what I'm really interested in, to see if they're doing anything similar to what I'm doing. So let's look specifically at those math interventions. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom of the page here, and we'll see who those colleges are. So the 4 colleges that came up are Harper College, Northampton again, Raritan Valley, and Tarrant County Community College. So this is a very discrete list, which is hopefully very targeted for somebody like Linda who's looking to make a connection with a college. So what happens next? Right, so first we're going to find the best description, the best match based on these little highlighted descriptions that I showed you before. So here we see at Northampton, for this particular intervention, Math 022 Elementary Algebra. They're targeting academically underprepared students, but notice the scaling level, right, more than 60%. So this is a very fully scaled intervention, which as a college in year 3, we're probably reaching hopefully this point, and we're looking for tips and techniques perhaps about scaling. We get a little bit of an excerpt of the intervention description, but we're interested, of course, of seeing the whole thing. So let's take a look further at what the information is that the college has supplied to Achieving the Dream for other colleges to learn about what they're doing. So this is the landing page based on the intervention that we've selected. So here we see that Math 022 Elementary Algebra, and we can scroll through this to see what the college has told us. So we can see the first piece of info around starting academic year. So again, this is a heavily scaled intervention, and in this case, not surprisingly, it was started some number of years ago. So the college started this intervention in 2007-8. But you'll see in the description that they've provided, they've been continuing to refine. So when Linda was talking about what happens in year 2, 3, 4, etc., it's always evaluating and refining. So in this case, they've done some additional or made some additional refinements in fall 2010, so fairly recently. They made some changes to this to try to continue to improve this particular course. So we can see the more information about the type, the content area, etc. We get that proportion, and then at the very bottom of the page here, let me show you to make sure that you're able to follow what I'm saying. We've got the outcome indicators that are targeted by this intervention. So as Linda described earlier, Achieving the Dream has 5 outcome indicators that we ask colleges to report data to us on, and we try to keep those 5 outcome indicators really, at the, in the spotlight. And so for this particular work that they're doing, they've told us that they're trying to impact this outcome indicator of completing the courses that they take with a grade of C or better. So this gives us a little bit more information about the intervention so that we can determine whether, in fact, we want to make a match with this college. Oops, sorry. At the very bottom of the form here, it says to contact this college, take note of the intervention ID above, and then fill out the form. Right, so we are asking colleges to notify us when they'd like to make a connection. We're doing this for a number of reasons. One, quite frankly, so that we know about connections that are being made amongst our network. Second is to ensure that the colleges who are going to make connections sort of get properly introduced, and that we get them to the right person at the college who can help them with this particular intervention. And third, as part of being in the Achieving the Dream network, this is one of the benefits that you get. Right? So for those of you that are on the call that might be with Achieving the Dream colleges, you have access to the contact information. For those who are outside of the network, you have access to the intervention showcase itself to look at trends and to look at the information, but we don't provide the contact info. We're also, as you can imagine, a little bit protective to make sure that the colleges who are further along, like this one, in terms of a particular intervention, don't really get bombarded with requests. So we're also looking at ways to just try to manage that, since this is a new system and a new platform, to ensure that we connect the right people. Of course, for those of you who are reporters, which of course is a number of you on the phone, we're hoping that you'll be able to use this platform as a way to find colleges who are doing interesting work and those who you would like to interview and talk with. So we would also, of course, be very open to having you contact us to ask for the contact details, and we would broker that relationship with you so that you could get to the right person at the college to learn more about the great work that they are doing. Let me take you through just one more example here, and then I see there's a couple of questions, so I will answer those. So let's look at Harper College. So again, for this particular scenario, I'm interested in talking to a few people, so I'm looking now at a second intervention. This one's called Partners for Success, a Compass Math project. Based on that description, again, I see from the pop-up that it is fully scaled, so more than 60%. So let's look at the full intervention description. So we go to the description, and you can see that for this college, they provided quite a lot of textual information. This is the first time that we have collected and made this information publicly available, meaning available to our network and to others like yourselves who are participating in this webinar. And I would expect that over time we will have more textual information provided to help each other. This is a system and a platform that will only get better over time as more colleges take advantage of it. So if we look at this Partners for Success, we can see the write-up for this particular math project. Right? And again, we can see when it was started. So in this case, it was more recently started, so the 2009-10 academic year. Right? And it is around relationship with K-12 and how those students play into the college and come into the college to better prepare them for their college-level coursework. The proportion that was served, again, is fully scaled to more than 60%. And the outcome indicator, the Achieving the Dream outcome indicator they're focusing on is completing remedial or developmental courses to get ready to advance to the credit-bearing courses. So the outcome indicators that are earlier in the process. And so I will pause there and look at the question. So I'm sorry, I have to read. Terrific. So David said that the detail that's provided on the pages is not meant to be really robust. The whole idea is to connect one college with another, and I'm glad that you got that from the discussion thus far, David. That's absolutely right. That this is the first step in a journey, as these things always are. Being a technical person, so this is the first release of this platform and this information, and it will continue to improve. And I do think that we will get more robust descriptions as time goes on. But really, the whole point is to be able to take somebody like Linda, who is a challenge and is something she's trying to find who to call, to the Ghostbusters scenario of who you're going to call. She's trying to find the right person to call, to be able to to make a connection and to ask questions. Because even if we built out a much more robust description here, it still isn't going to answer all the questions of how did you do it, what challenges do you have, tell me more about your student population, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all about connecting the colleges. So thank you for that, David. Appreciate it. So the last piece of this short demonstration and little sneak preview is just to tell you what's in the Achieving the Dream intervention showcase itself. So just another way to look at the data. So if we look at the left-hand side of this chart is just a different way to look at the data that we have. Right, so this is looking at it across academic disciplines, right, which is again the same as we used in that what's called a tree map, but it might be a little bit easier to understand what's in the database by looking at it in bar chart format. So you can see out of all the interventions that are reported to us, and again, colleges can select more than one academic discipline that they're focusing on. We see that there's a heavy emphasis on math and student success courses. Right, and the sort of the founding of Achieving the Dream was around a lot of developmental work, and it continues to focus on developmental work, in addition to other things, of course. So you can see that there's a lot of activity in developmental math and a lot of activity with student success courses, where colleges have learned from one another that these student success courses tend to really help our students. There's also, a fair number of courses in English and reading, which sometimes get short shrift in the conversations because everybody focuses on math, but many of our colleges are doing work also in English and reading courses. If we look over here at by intervention type, Again, you can see heavy emphasis in developmental education in that first year experience, a lot of work in advising and student services that are provided. I'm really happy to see down here with the faculty professional development at 13%. We've been working very hard as Achieving the Dream to move the conversation out to faculty and to really work with faculty engagement and faculty professional development. And obviously our colleges are really picking up on that and doing work in this area. So very exciting data to look at and to see the kinds of things that our colleges are putting in place. I have another question. So Iris asked, is there analysis done on how multiple interventions are having a collective impact on student success? That is a great question, and I wish I could say yes. Particularly being a technical person, I can imagine where this platform is going to go. And so right now, when our colleges go through their annual reflection process, they're providing this Achieving the Dream intervention showcase information to us. They also provide data to us about the success of those interventions, or in some cases the failure of those interventions. That data is provided to us, unfortunately, in a way that we can't easily put it into the system at this point. So we're working to define some templates and some other ways to collect some consistent data across colleges, across these interventions, to be able to look at really what is a key question that I'm sure all of you have. It's not only about which interventions are the colleges putting in place, but which ones are working better than others. But I will caveat all of that with all those apples and oranges that we have in this world, that even a college that is very successful with a particular intervention, if you try to bring it into your college, it may not work as well because your students are different, your faculty is different, your leadership is different. So we very much want to add a data element to this, but we haven't gotten there yet. But the next time, hopefully, we have a webinar with you, we'll have a lot to tell you on that. The other, I think, piece of what you're asking, Iris, too, is about multiple interventions having an impact. And it's one of the challenges of this work and the evaluation piece that Linda was talking about is you say, we're going to put in place a student success course and we're going to evaluate it in a particular way. But that same student may be receiving other interventions. So it's not just the student success course. They might be part of a mentoring program and part of a special advising service. So every student can be serviced by a number of interventions. So it gets very hard to have a specific piece of data tied to just one intervention. So we're also, at Achieving the Dream as a whole, really thinking hard about how to best capture what's happening with that student when they are serviced by more than one intervention. So thank you for that question, Iris. If I didn't fully answer it, you can ask another one. Did you want to add anything to that, Linda?
Well, I think that's a really good question, Iris, and there's just a couple of points that I might add to that. One is that, as a community college, we're bound by, needing to provide open access, to all of our students. And as much as we'd like to have a research design in which we're using, experimental, conditions where we're randomly assigning, folks to different levels of a condition and that some, people are in a control group, we've always erred on the side of, we want to bring, these support services to as many students as possible. So, it kind of goes back to that baseline question where we didn't feel comfortable restricting the class to others who might want to take it, but our best estimate for guessing at how effective this class was to not only look at those overarching 5 outcome measures, but to look back at those students who hadn't received the course in 2006. But having said what Nicole's already talked about, one of the things that's also important is we ask our colleges to set targets and goals across all of those 5 outcome measures. And so we're expecting that, while this is not an experimental design, that we're going to see movement and that they set ambitious goals, for example, on retention from the fall to fall, or, increasing credentials for certificate students and degree students by X% over 3 years. And so that is kind of, and some use a dashboard to do that, but there are many different ways that they can look at that. But no, you can't always be confidently sure that you can attribute those results to one particular intervention. But the other thing that we also do is is we have those evaluation models in place so that we're collecting formative data about a specific intervention. So, for example, with the Student Success course, I'm doing pre-post measures where I'm implementing a survey at the beginning of the course and the end where, we're asking students what their level of knowledge is with regard to all of the constructs that are taught in the course at the beginning, and then we're asking them again at the end of the semester so we can see if there's a change in time. And then we can also troubleshoot the class to see if we need to make improvements with regard to any particular one construct. The other thing we're doing is we're doing qualitative research, to ask students, well, what's going well in the class, what's not going well. So we are drilling down to capture intervention-specific data that will allow us to know whether or not that intervention is successful, but not necessarily at the level of being able to say that this intervention contributed to increased certificates or degrees by itself.
Terrific. Great. Thanks, Linda. We have a couple of other questions. So Alvin asks about the title Student Support Services. He's wondering whether that is a generic program or related to the TRIO Student Support Services program. And it's not related to TRIO. So it is a generic label that we've used for student support services. So thanks for that question, Alvin. And then Brooke asks, do you think there are fewer interventions in science, for example, because student skills are better, or because English, math are more often required of all students, or because English, math are the foundations of so many other courses? And I'll let Linda answer that one because I couldn't.
I think that's a really good question, Brooke. I think it's the latter. English and math are the foundations of so many other courses, and so almost all of our colleges have what are called skill codes, meaning you have to be at college level in either reading, writing, or math, or any combination of those three. And that's why we call them gateway courses. So those are the courses that they have to pass, that college level math class or that college level English class, before they can go on and take, say, an anatomy and physiology class or a chemistry class or a microbiology class. But I'm seeing a trend where a lot of colleges are saying, in order to broadly engage all of the campus community, we really need to have faculty who teach outside of developmental courses participate. And so, for example, one of my colleges has done a lot of work in looking at high enrollment, low completion courses. And those classes were not developmental education classes, and they are designing targeted interventions such as reading apprenticeship programs or other types of programs to support the faculty in teaching those classes. And so we're seeing that there are more and more interventions that are addressing that, and I would expect to see that the intervention showcase would reflect those changes over time.
Terrific. Any further questions before we go into the last part of our discussion today? Terrific. So tips and lessons, what reporters need to know. Back to Linda for that.
I just, I feel, kind of awkward talking about tips and lessons, but because you guys are the subject matter experts, but I'm more curious to, to put a few things out there and would love to have you to respond and basically educate me on, what maybe I need to know when I'm talking to you, if I'm talking about successes or opportunities at my college or any of the colleges that I might work with. But let's go ahead and let me put up the next slide, which, I have to be honest, when I first heard about this, I had a very strong reaction. I am curious to know if others of you in the group have seen this particular billboard that read, and this was all over the place in Austin, and it hit nationally. And it said 4% of Austin Community College students graduate in 3 years. Is that a good use of tax dollars? Texas Association of Business. I can tell you that if I were Richard Rhodes, the president at Austin Community College, that I probably didn't go into work feeling very good that day, and I might have actually been quite a bit hot about that. One of the reasons why I put this up here, though, is to basically talk about the importance of context. And so this data was pulled out of our IPEDS data, which every community college has to, and university has to report to in order to receive federal funding for financial aid. So we all do that. But that data only reflects, approximately 30% of our students because it's only looking at students who are first-time and it's looking at students who are full-time. And you'll notice a few things about this particular stat. So they say 4% of students finish in 3 years. Well, one, again, it's not an accurate picture of who we're serving. The second thing that it neglects to consider is about a third, or over 30% of our students will transfer on to four-year universities. I would be hard-pressed to say that that's not a success. So I would have added that on there and put probably 37% at least. Then you add on, what about all of the numbers of students who are completing certificates? So they may not have completed a 2-year degree, but they're gainfully employed, and we're quite pleased that they got a certificate that can put them in a trade that they're happy with, and can increase the earning potential of that particular individual and help them to contribute to society. So it's not an accurate picture, and quite frankly, if you look at the next slide, I want to underscore that this is the same thing that you're going to see if you look at any other community college. So if you take the data out of context, that's one issue, but those same issues that are affecting Austin Community College are affecting all of us, which is why we're a part of the Achieving the Dream Network, and why we have, why we're the largest national nonprofit student reform movement in the nation, because these are issues affecting us as a nation at whole. So, the one thing I say is, be very careful when talking about data, because there are lots of consequences, and sometimes it doesn't tell the whole story. So the next thing is a number. It's a ratio. It's 5 out of 16. So what I ask here is, you have a percentage. What about a denominator? So a college that you're talking with may proclaim that they've increased the percentage of, say, African American males who've successfully completed college algebra, and let's say they say by 30% in 2 years. Now, at a college like my own, if I didn't tell you how many students that actually represented, you might be pretty impressed. But if I told you that that only represented 2 students, you might not be. So when colleges talk about percentages, asking them how many students this actually represents is a perfectly appropriate question, so that you can understand whether or not this is meaningful to report. The next thing I would say is that colleges, love to share their stories. You guys are wonderful because you love to listen to our stories. But now that you have had this opportunity to kind of deep dive into the development of a culture of evidence and to look at data with us, now you should be asking them, how do you know that this is the case at your college? And what evidence have you used to make these types of decisions? So those types of critical questions are important for helping the colleges to share their students if they're not sharing that on their own. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of colleges who want to skip that qualitative analysis step, that question that answers the answer to the why question. Well, that question is critical, as I mentioned earlier, and I would encourage all of you, when you're talking with other folks in your communities, to ask people, did you talk to students? And if so, what did they say? Who else did you talk with? Did you talk with faculty members? And what are they saying, about the particular struggles, barriers, and challenges that they have? Or what are they saying about how an intervention is working for them or not working for them? So you want to ask them whether or not they have actually done that, because that is a very, big part of understanding the whole picture in telling the story. And that's all of the tips and lessons I have, because I was guessing that you guys might educate me on things that I should be doing.
I want to quickly thank the Education Writers Association before we continue with questions. I was going to thank Kenneth, who is online, but I can see he dropped off just in time for me to thank him for helping us organize this. We do hope to do more of these, and appreciate the number of people that have turned out today. We have more than 40 people who've been with us the whole time and really paying attention, so thank you for that. But we have a few minutes for questions, if you have questions that you'd like to ask that haven't already come up. And
or college algebra problems.
There are college algebra problems,
college algebra problems out there. I wouldn't be able to tell you if they were right or wrong, but I could put them out there.
Any questions from anybody? And again, you can type them in. I would open the lines, but it's always a challenge to have voice on these webinars with this number of people. Doesn't look like there are any questions. So again, thank you all for being here. There is a survey that you'll get right as you exit out of the webinar. So once you exit out, you will be asked just a couple of questions that'll just help us understand your reaction to the intervention showcase. And we'll be using some of that reaction probably in the launch tomorrow, so you'll help inform us as we move forward. So thank you very much for taking a moment to fill out that survey. And again, thank you very much for being here. And thanks to the EWA for making this all possible. And thank you, Linda, for bearing through it, being sick. She sounded great, didn't she?
Thank you, guys.
But she can't wait to go back to the hotel and go to bed.
If it was anyone else but EWA, I wouldn't do it.
Right. So again, thanks, everybody. Really appreciate your attention. And have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Goodbye.